Bosnia's wild economic ride, from war to wealth? This is Bosnia and Herzegovina, a nation with perhaps the darkest geopolitical history in all of Europe, which is saying a lot for many. The all too recent memories of conflict represent the high cost of independence from the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, a large state in the Western Balkans that no longer exists. The end of the conflict in 1995 triggered the beginning of a colossal economic recovery effort that not only sought to physically rebuild Bosnia and Herzegovina but also aimed to restructure the economy away from centralized planning and towards the free market. Almost 30 years later, the nation is in transition from socialism to capitalism with mixed success. Now a medium-high economy, Bosnia-Herzegovina is experiencing robust growth in tourism, energy production, and metal production while maintaining low levels of public debt and high capital reserves in its banks. Additionally, the country has had a clear goal to work towards, having formally obtained candidate status for the European Union in 2022. This is potentially a beneficial situation for all, with Bosnia and Herzegovina benefiting from increased confidence in market access and participation in supply chains, while the EU manages geopolitical risk by befriending a nation with a significant pro-Russian cohort within its population. However, regardless of its relationship with the EU, Bosnia and Herzegovina has a series of deeply rooted challenges that have worsened since it became an independent state after the war. Ineffective governance, chronic unemployment, and a steady decline in population are adding tension to a nation divided along ethnic lines, which many believe have not yet come to terms with their difficult history. So, how did the newly independent nation recover from war and genocide? Why is Bosnia and Herzegovina's economic development stagnant? And finally, what opportunities and challenges await the nation? After doing all this, we can place Bosnia and Herzegovina in the Economics Explained national ranking. Economics is a complex subject due to its interdisciplinary nature, combining mathematics, statistics, geography, history, psychology, and sociology. What is not complex is how easy it is for online hackers to find your data and exploit it for personal gain. That's why we collaborated with Incog for this video. All you have to do is grant them the right to work for you, and they will contact data brokers and use the law to request the removal of your data. When I set up my Incog, they found 89 places on the internet where nefarious actors could pay to get my email address, my phone number, and even my home address. Within an hour, although Incog had removed 26 of the places where people could buy my data and was working on tracking down others, you don't have to do anything yourself. Incog contacts and removes you from online lists so you receive fewer spam emails, robocalls, or even people trying to take out loans in your name. Reclaim your personal data with Incog and use the economic code at the link below to get a 60% discount on an annual plan. In the good or more likely the bad, it is impossible to understand the modern economy of Bosnia and Herzegovina without at least a superficial knowledge of its too recent history. At the end of the 1980s and the beginning of the 1990s, a wave of national sentiment grew throughout Yugoslavia, which consisted of 6 federations with their own cultures and identities. After Slovenia and Croatia seceded from Yugoslavia, Bosnia and Herzegovina held a referendum for independence in 1992. The result was in favor of independence, which was widely welcomed by Bosniaks and Bosnian Croats but rejected by Yugoslavia and Bosnian Serbs, who made up 33% of the population. Conflict broke out shortly after, as different ethnic factions fought for territory in an escalating struggle that eventually led to NATO bombings and the deployment of United Nations peacekeeping troops. In total, around 100,000 people died, 2.2 million people were displaced, and GDP decreased by 84% after international efforts for a peaceful solution. The war ended in 1995 with the signing of the Dayton Agreement at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, USA. It was this agreement that founded the modern political and economic powers of Bosnia and Herzegovina to this day. Obviously, this is the incredibly simplified summary of an infinitely complex matter, but the conclusion is that it was a series of negative circumstances to start the nation-building process, especially because many of these fundamental problems were never truly resolved. Founded on compromise and power sharing, the Dayton Agreement effectively divided the state into two geographically separate entities: the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina in the center south and west of the state, controlled by Bosniaks and Bosnian Croats, and the Republika Srpska in the north and east of the state, controlled by Bosnian Serbs. Due to the Dayton Agreement and power sharing in Bosnia and Herzegovina, power is highly decentralized, with both these entities in complete control of their own tax collection, development policies, public spending, and welfare programs. The only economic powers that reside at the state level are monetary policy, which is managed by the central bank, foreign trade policy, and macroeconomic coordination. This level of decentralization for a relatively small country is what makes Bosnia and Herzegovina unique and was a requirement for the desperately needed peace to allow the economic recovery that followed. It took until 2003 for the nation's GDP to finally recover to levels last seen in 1990. Requiring an average annual growth rate of 22% after the end of the war. Yes, much of this growth comes from the reemployment of enormous unused capacity in the labor market, but even when considering these factors, one cannot deny that an average annual growth rate of 22% for almost an entire decade is an impressive feat. So, how did this recovery happen in the early years of peace? Much of the recovery can obviously be attributed to the large sums of foreign aid that Bosnia and Herzegovina received from the international community in the post-war period for the reconstruction of damaged and destroyed infrastructure, including $5.1 billion from the World Bank, the EU, and partner donors over time. However, economic growth has increasingly been driven by pro-capitalist reforms that have constituted the nation's transition from market socialism to private enterprise. To be clear, this transition of economic systems was not as extreme as in other countries of Central and Eastern Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the USSR. As part of Yugoslavia, Bosnia and Herzegovina were already using the free market to allocate production and exchange, with enterprises being state-owned or worker-owned and managed. In the second half of the 1990s and the early 2000s, large state-owned enterprises began to be privatized, which presented an opportunity for European banks that began to provide liquidity and management expertise to the country's recently reformed banking sector. Insolvent banks were closed, state-owned banks were privatized, a new regulatory framework was introduced to guide returns on investment and manage systemic risk, and further property rights laws were introduced along with the establishment of key institutions such as two stock exchanges and the central bank. After the war, many different currencies circulated without a generally accepted standard of payment, and therefore a key factor of the recovery was the introduction of a new currency, the convertible mark, in 1998. Not only did it standardize the monetary system, but it also generated financial stability as it was pegged to the German mark and eventually to the euro in 1999. A currency peg has a fixed exchange rate with another currency. The value of the currency is not influenced by demand and supply in the foreign exchange market relative to the fixed exchange rate because the central bank offsets large movements by countering the market when necessary, using its reserves of both currencies. When there is excess demand for the national currency on the market, the central bank will sell part of this reserve of national currency to match the success. On the other hand, if there is excess supply of the national currency on the market, the central bank will buy the excess using its reserves of the pegged currency. This ensures balance in the markets, preventing the currency from deviating from the currency to which it is pegged, and consequently, the Bosnian and Herzegovinian economy benefits from the stability that the euro currency brings. Now, it is worth noting that currency pegs do not always work in practice, and there is a certain risk involved. Take, for example, the Russian ruble in 1998, which was pegged to the US dollar. Investors were selling the ruble hard and fast, which forced the Central Bank of Russia to buy the ruble using US dollars to defend the value of its currency. After selling 27 billion of its US dollar reserves in less than a year, the central bank ran out of US dollars, and the fixed exchange rate finally broke. The ruble devalued by 2/3 in little over a month, which meant the price of imports skyrocketed, causing inflation and enormous drops in real living standards. So far, however, the Bosnian and Herzegovinian Central Bank has successfully maintained the fixed exchange rate, which has fueled confidence in the currency and attracted significant amounts of foreign investment. This has rewritten the nation's narrative from one of post-war recovery to one of rapid modernization and development. Large inflows of foreign direct investment have generated employment, improved infrastructure, and helped establish key export sectors in the national economy, such as electricity and metal production. This was a fairly standard and promising path of development for a country with easy access to both Eastern and Western markets. But it did not last forever. Fast forward to today, and foreign direct investments still constitute a huge part of the economy in Bosnia and Herzegovina, particularly in the banking and manufacturing sectors. The latest statistics estimate that the total stock of FDI is worth approximately $9.3 billion. However, net inflows have significantly decreased after the 2008 financial crisis, which, like in many other nations, seems to be a turning point for the trajectory of the economy. Private investments within the country have not yet recovered from this weakness, and the reason for this is that Bosnia and Herzegovina has some of the highest administrative burdens for businesses not only in Europe but in the world. In 2020, the World Bank found that there are only 6 countries in the world where registering a new business is more difficult. The country is also ranked 173rd for ease of doing business with construction permits and 41st for paying taxes. Although the most recent data is a few years old, and the country ranks slightly better for other metrics on ease of doing business, this is clearly discouraging for both foreign and national investors who may not have the time and legal skills to properly administer their business operations in such a complicated regulatory framework. This explains why Bosnia and Herzegovina has a large informal economy, which is another problem in itself. These problems are largely caused by the political system within Bosnia and Herzegovina, which, to put it frankly, is excessively complex, fragmented, and ineffective in taking actions to drive economic development. While the Dayton Agreement was hailed as a success story of international peace mediation in the modern era during the 1990s, few thought about the implications that power sharing would have on the overall functioning of the government in the long term once this peace was achieved. The political complexity starts right at the top with a triple political leadership structure. Every 4 years, 3 presidents are elected, each representing one of the nation's ethnic components: Bosniaks, Bosnian Croats, and Bosnian Serbs. These 3 presidents rotate every 8 months until the end of the 4-year term, and each has veto power to block decisions they believe are contrary to the interests of their own ethnic group. This high degree of power sharing has incorporated political friction into the government from the top down, impeding political solutions and slowing down the legislative process. So, while this political structure has undoubtedly contributed to sustaining peace, it has created an ineffective government that is unable to promote entrepreneurship. This has reduced investments, causing unused capacity in the labor market where the unemployment rate is 10.7%. It has fallen significantly since 2015, when the rate was 27.7%. Taking these statistics at face value, one might think that the drop in the unemployment rate is a positive signal, but the reality for Bosnia and Herzegovina is that this has been caused by a declining workforce, as working-age adults leave the country to find work elsewhere. The scope of the problem is demonstrated by the fact that Bosnia and Herzegovina has one of the largest immigrant-to-population ratios in the world, which causes dependence on remittances for economic growth rather than investments in its own economy. Perhaps even more concerning is that immigration is leading to population decline, with the total population already having decreased by 23% since 2000. So, given such a steep decline in fundamental economic factors, is there any hope for the future to reverse or at least slow down the exit of productive workers? Bosnians and Herzegovinians must improve their economic offer to citizens by increasing the quality and quantity of available jobs. Ask any macroeconomist, and they will tell you that investment is the key to achieving this goal. Fortunately for the nation, there seems to be the capacity to increase this. Currently, the capital adequacy ratio of the banking sector, which controls the level of risk and the ability to protect depositors, is at 19.5%, well above the regulatory minimum of 12%, meaning that the national banking sector could increase long-term financing for key growth areas of the economy such as energy and metal production. To do this, however, three things must happen first. The discouraging high administrative burdens of running a business must be reduced to incentivize entrepreneurship. Some efforts have already been made to address this problem through the digitalization of tax reporting and customs declarations for trade, but more widespread reforms are necessary to significantly reduce administration and encourage entrepreneurship. Second, corruption in the political system and the banking sector must be addressed so that capital is employed more effectively in the economy. Third, the government must ensure that state-owned enterprises and public sector spending are not crowding out private investments. This last point is particularly important as the state is an enormous economic power with tax revenues making up 44% of GDP, and state-owned enterprises have a larger presence than in any other country in the Western Balkans. Bosnia and Herzegovina's transition towards a market economy has only gone so far, with the state still holding significant ownership in over 550 enterprises. This will likely also be an important point of future discussions on advancing its EU accession prospects, which represents a historic opportunity for the nation that would increase confidence and allow greater participation in value-added supply chains. So far, the nation has made good progress towards EU integration since becoming a candidate in 2022, especially after introducing new anti-corruption laws. In light of this progress, the European Commission has recommended starting advanced negotiations with Bosnia and Herzegovina to plan and agree on a path towards its full accession. Although this is promising, it is unlikely that the nation will become a member for many years to come. Croatia took 8 years from this phase to become a member, while Turkey has been in negotiations for almost 20 years. The point is that there is no guarantee of becoming a member once the nation reaches this stage, and with the range of political and economic challenges that Bosnia and Herzegovina possesses, the wait could be that of testing the limits of political patience. Moreover, EU accession alone will not solve the country's problems, just like Greece, Spain, and Portugal. Bosnia and Herzegovina has immense potential, but it must do more than seek a compromise to get there. Okay, now it's time to put Bosnia and Herzegovina in economics explained. National ranking in terms of size, Bosnia and Herzegovina has a GDP of $27 billion, which means that most national economies are larger. It ranks between Trinidad and Tobago and Zimbabwe, giving it a 2 out of 10. Distributed over a population of 3.2 million people, this means the GDP per capita is 8,426. Placing it below the global average and far from the EU average, giving the economy a 4 out of 10. Stability and confidence are a mixed picture. While the central bank has maintained the currency peg with the euro and public debt levels are low, the declining population and ineffective government are weakening confidence in the economy. Additionally, ethnic divisions are starting to reawaken as political leaders in the Serb territory of the nation increasingly question the legitimacy of the central government and demand their own independence. In light of this, it gets a 5 out of 10. Growth is steady with an average of 3% since 2000, but it has remained somewhat stagnant since the 2008 financial crisis, so it gets a 5 out of 10. And finally, Bosnia and Herzegovina has a solid manufacturing base, especially in metal and electricity production. However, the economy remains a net importer, and there is room to further develop its industry and increase productivity and exports. It gets a score of 4 out of 10. This gives Bosnia and Herzegovina an average score of 4 out of 10, placing it here at the bottom of the ranking. If you liked this video, you will also like the video we made on the economy of Turkey, which deals with similar themes on how different economic and political systems affect inequality of production and growth. We are interested in discovering your personal experience on the topic. Write it in the comments and feel free to ask any questions, we will be happy to interact. Feel free to leave a comment so that we can improve the content. Your like would be the cherry on top, and click subscribe to stay informed about upcoming publications.